It happened in a small provincial town where everyone knew each other. The old Hotel Corona, abandoned for decades, stood on the outskirts of town, as a reminder of a tragedy no one wanted to remember. It was said that something terrible had happened here, something to do with mirrors. Marina was a curious girl. She was always attracted to abandoned places, and when she heard the story about the Corona Hotel, she decided to explore it. She gathered her friends, Andre, who was always a skeptic, and Lisa, who was afraid of everything in the world, but went anyway for company. "It's just an old building," Andre said as they approached the entrance. "What could be scary?" Lisa, trembling, corrected the flashlight in her hands. "What if there are ghosts?" Marina only smiled. "Ghosts, they're just legends." They stepped inside. Dust, cobwebs, and the smell of mold met them just beyond the threshold. It was dark inside, with only the rays of flashlights illuminating the ruined furniture and scraps of wallpaper. On the second floor, they found a long corridor with rooms. Most of the doors were closed, but one of them, number 7, was ajar. Marina looked inside. "Look, there's something here." The room looked oddly clean compared to the rest of the hotel. A large antique mirror in a cracked frame hung on the wall. It seemed out of place among the dirt and destruction. "Why is it so cleaned?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "Maybe someone had been here recently," Andre suggested. But Marina had already approached the mirror. She looked carefully at her reflection, but something seemed strange. Her reflection was moving, out of sync with her movements. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "Wow." Lisa and Andre came closer. At that moment Marina's reflection smiled a wide, sinister smile, which Marina herself did not smile, and then her reflection reached out a hand, right through the mirror. "Wow!" Lisa shouted. They ran out of the room, but the door slammed shut behind them with a loud bang. When they tried to enter again, the door wouldn't budge. Back home, Marina could not forget what she had seen. She started looking for information about the Hotel Corona. After a few days, she managed to find an old newspaper article. It told of a tragedy that had occurred in this building many years ago. One of the guests, a woman named Anna, had died in room 7. She was obsessed with her reflection and believed that the mirror was a portal to another world. One night, she disappeared. Her body was never found, but the mirror was still there. "It's just a coincidence," said Andre when Marina told him about it. But Lisa was terrified. "We must destroy this mirror. It's dangerous." Marina hesitated. She felt as if the mirror was calling her back. A few days later, Marina found herself back at the hotel. She knew it was crazy, but she couldn't resist. Room 7 was exactly as she remembered it. The mirror still hung on the wall. "I know you're here," she whispered, looking at her reflection. The reflection smiled and stepped forward. Marina felt cold hands grab her wrists and pull her inside the mirror. She screamed, but her scream dissolved into the void. The next morning, Andre and Lisa found room 7 empty. The mirror was gone, but there were words written in blood on the wall. "Now it's her turn to wait." Since then, no one has seen Marina again. They say that sometimes, if you go into an abandoned hotel at night, you can hear her voice calling from the darkness. When the Sokoloff family moved into an old house on the outskirts of town, they thought it would be a new beginning. The house was big, but it was clearly in need of repair. Peeling paint, creaky floors, and the smell of dust suggested that no one had lived here for a long time. However, the price was too attractive to pass up. "It's so quiet here," said Masha, their 12-year-old daughter, peering into one of the rooms. She had always been sensitive to the atmosphere, and now it seemed to her that the house was watching them. That's just an old house, replied her father, Igor, taking apart boxes, and in a week it will be as good as new. Her mother, Olga, did not share her husband's optimism. She felt something strange, but she put it down to fatigue from the move. The next day they discovered the basement. The entrance was hidden behind an old rug in the living room. The heavy wooden door with rusty hinges looked like it hadn't been opened in a long time. I wonder what's in there, Igor asked, pulling out a flashlight. Maybe we should, Olga said cautiously. What if it's dangerous in there? But curiosity got the better of me. The cellar was spacious, but frighteningly dark. There were strange symbols on the walls, carved in deep furrows. There was an old desk in the corner, littered with yellowed papers, and rust-covered chains on the floor. What is this place? Masha whispered, her voice trembling. Igor shrugged his shoulders. Perhaps someone used it as a workshop. Don't worry, we'll clean it up. But Olga noticed that the symbols on the walls were similar to those she had seen in books about magic. She decided not to say anything, so as not to scare the children. During the night, Masha woke up to a rustling sound. It seemed that someone was walking around the house. She left the room and heard footsteps coming from the basement. Her heart raced, but she decided to check it out. As she descended the creaky stairs, she saw a light. The flashlight her father had left there was still on. The next morning, Masha told her parents what had happened. It's just a dream, Igor said, though he looked worried. I don't want to sleep alone anymore, Masha whispered. Olga began to notice that strange things were happening in the house. Doors closed by themselves, and at night she heard footsteps. One day she found scratches on the wall in her bedroom, as if someone had tried to get out. Igor decided to deal with the basement. He called a neighbor, Vladimir, who was familiar with the history of the house. This house belonged to one man, Vladimir said, examining the symbols. It was said that he practiced black magic. One day people stopped seeing him, and then children in the neighborhood started disappearing. The police searched the house, but found nothing. What happened to him? Igor asked. No one knows, but after that the house stood abandoned. Vladimir offered to board up the basement, but Igor refused. We'll manage on our own. Meanwhile, Masha began to dream. She dreamed of the basement, only now it was full of people. They were standing in chains, their faces contorted with pain, and in the center of the room stood a man in a black cloak, looking straight at her. You're next, he whispered. One evening Olga decided to go down to the cellar again. She found an old book among the papers on the table. It was the diary of the previous owner. It spoke of a ritual that allowed to seal souls in shadows. The man wrote that the shadows became his servants, but warned that they could get out of control. Oh my God, Olga whispered. At that moment the light went out. She heard whispers around her, multiple voices calling her name. The flashlight fell out of her hands, and she saw them shadows that moved on their own, sliding along the walls and floor. Go away, she shouted, running out of the basement. When she told Igor about it, he finally agreed to get help, but it was too late. Masha woke up to someone holding her hand. She opened her eyes and saw a shadow standing next to her bed. The shadow held out its hand, and Masha felt herself being pulled down. Since then, no one has seen the Sokola family again. They say that sometimes, if you go into this house, you can hear children's laughter coming from the basement. Emily hadn't been to Greenhall in over a decade. After her parents' mysterious disappearance in 2003, she left the town, moving in with her aunt in another state. But now grown up, she decided to return to sell her parents' house and finally bring closure to this scary phase of her life. She didn't remember much of her childhood, just scraps of memories. Gray streets, the forest that stretched along the edge of town, and the mysterious well at the back of the yard. When the car stopped in front of her old house, a chill ran down her spine. The windows looked empty, the roof sagged, and the porch smelled damp and rotten. Most disturbing, however, was the sensation of someone else's gaze. It was as if someone was waiting for her to return. Emily spent her first night in the house uneasy. She dreamed of strange images, the silhouette of a tall, faceless man standing beside her bed, whispers that filled the house, and a voice calling from beneath the floor. She woke in a cold sweat and noticed that the door to the hallway was ajar, though she had closed it before she went to sleep. The next morning she decided to look around the house. In the basement, covered with old boxes and a thick layer of dust, she came across a wooden panel in the floor that was clearly hiding something underneath. After much effort, she managed to lift it, revealing a dark, narrow passage downward. It smelled of ancient dampness and something else, something alive. The next morning she decided to look around the house. In the basement, covered with old boxes and a thick layer of dust, she came across a wooden panel in the floor that was clearly hiding something underneath. After much effort, she managed to lift it, revealing a dark, narrow passage downward. It smelled of ancient dampness and something else, something alive. The sound of footsteps behind her made her heart quicken. She turned around sharply. No one. But then the darkness inside the well began to move, and from there came a voice, cold and familiar. "Emily, you're back." At that moment, something grabbed her arm. The cold pierced her body, and she lost consciousness. When Emily woke up, she was no longer in the basement. There was a thick fog around her, distorting the outlines of space. She couldn't make out where she was. Reality had dissolved into this nightmare. Voices whispered in the darkness, and a tall silhouette reappeared in front of her. "You should never have come back," he said, and at the same instant something began to pull her down. Emily screamed, but her voice was drowned in the surrounding darkness. She tried to pull away, but cold hands grabbed her by the shoulders and dragged her into the unknown. Images flashed before her eyes. A child's room, her mother crying, her father standing by the well and whispering something into its depths. "Don't look down there, Emily. Never look." Emily felt solid ground beneath her feet. She was back in the house, but everything was different now. The wallpaper was peeling. The furniture was covered in black mold, and there was a thick smell of rot in the air. In the mirror across the hall, she saw her reflection, but it wasn't moving like her. Her reflection looked at her with alien-like eyes and smiled slowly. "You're one of us now, Emily," a voice whispered from behind her. She turned around and saw her parents. They were standing side by side, but their faces were as gone as mummies, and thick black liquid dripped from their eyes. "You must complete the ritual. You must open the door." "What door?" Emily screamed, stumbling backward. And then the floor beneath her feet shook, and a thud came from the cellar, as if something heavy and ancient was rising from the depths. The well, it was calling to her. Emily didn't remember how she'd ended up at the edge of the well. The dark abyss inside it pulsed, calling out to her. Hands rose from the depths, contorted and disembodied, reaching for her face. Her body moved on its own, as if someone was controlling it from the outside. The last thing she heard before she fell into darkness was her mother's voice. "Welcome home, Emily." And the house in Greenhall stood empty. Only if you listened long enough into the silence could you hear a distant, barely audible call. "Help!